I want you to understand what kind of woman my wife is before I tell you what her daughter did to her. She's the kind of woman who wakes up before the rest of the house and starts coffee without being asked. Who remembers that my buddy from work takes his without sugar? Who sends birthday cards, actual paper cards, with stamps, to people she's only met twice? She is not loud about any of this. She doesn't keep score. She just does it, because that's who she is. And for a long time, that made her an easy target. I want you to keep that in mind as I tell you this story. Because what happened last Christmas was not an isolated incident. It was the end of a very long road. Drop your city and the time where you are in the comments. I always like knowing who's out there listening. My wife's name is Joanna. She's 61 years old, retired now from 28 years as a school nurse. She gave more of herself to other people's children than most parents give to their own. When she finally hung up that badge, she said she just wanted a quiet life. Travel a little. Sleep past 6. Tend to the garden she'd been neglecting since 1997. Our son. I'll call him my son because I raised him, though he came into my life when he was 9. His Brendan. He's 34 now. Decent job in project management. Lives about 40 minutes north of us in the house he bought 3 years ago with his wife. His wife's name is Sky. I'll get to Sky. When Brendan was growing up, Joanna poured herself into that kid. PTA, Little League, the whole thing. When he had trouble in school, she was the one who stayed up with him, going over notes at the kitchen table until 1 in the morning. When he graduated, she cried so hard she couldn't see the stage. There is nothing she would not have done for that boy. And for a while, when he first got serious with Sky, things seemed fine. Sky was polite, quiet, laughed at the right moments. I remember thinking she seemed a little stiff, but I figured that was just nerves. Meeting the parents and all that, the stiffness didn't go away. About 6 months after they got married, I started noticing a pattern. When the 4 of us would get together for dinner, Sky would arrive, sit down, and spend most of the meal checking her phone. When Joanna talked, Sky would listen with this expression I can only describe as managed patience, like she was enduring something. When Joanna offered to help with anything, the wedding planning, the house stuff after they moved in, Sky would say, "Sure, that'd be great," and then never follow up or acknowledge the help afterward. Joanna never said anything. That's not her style. She'd come home from those dinners quieter than she left, and I'd ask how it went, and she'd say, "Fine. It was fine." I learned to read what fine meant. We hosted Thanksgiving that first year, and the one after. Joanna cooked for days. Turkey, stuffing made from scratch, sweet potato casserole, the cranberry relish she's been making since before I knew her. 2 kinds of pie. Sky and Brendan showed up, ate, and left without offering to wash a single dish. I told myself they were young, that they'd figure it out. Joanna told me not to make a big deal of it. By Christmas of last year, I should have known something was coming. Sky had been dropping hints for weeks. Mentions of how she'd always wanted a big family Christmas. How her own family was small and spread out, and they'd never really done the holidays properly. How it would be so meaningful to have something special this year. Joanna heard all of this, and her heart opened right up. Of course it did. She started thinking about what she could make. Started looking up recipes. She even went to the kitchen store in November and bought a new set of baking pans. The official request came on a Wednesday evening. Brendan called. He asked how we were doing, chatted for about 4 minutes, and then said, "Hey, so Sky wanted me to ask about Christmas." He handed the phone to Sky. Sky told Joanna, and I'm paraphrasing here, but barely, that she had a vision for the holiday. She was hosting at their house this year. She'd invited her coworkers, a few of Brendan's friends from college, her cousin who was visiting from Phoenix, and both sets of Brendan's aunts and uncles. She counted off the guest list, 22 people. Then she told Joanna what she needed. She wanted a full Christmas dinner, not buffet style, sit down, plated. She listed the dishes: standing rib roast, honey glazed ham, roasted potatoes, green bean casserole, dinner rolls from scratch, cranberry sauce, a vegetable medley, stuffed mushrooms as an appetizer, a cheese board for when guests arrived, Christmas pudding, a Yule log cake, and 2 dozen sugar cookies for the kids. 12 items. For 22 people. From scratch. She mentioned that Joanna should plan to arrive early to use their kitchen, and that she'd need to bring her own ingredients since she knew best what brand she liked. And then, this is the part that got me. She asked Joanna to bring her stand mixer. Joanna said she'd think about it. When she hung up the phone, I was sitting at the kitchen table. I'd only heard half the conversation. but I could read my wife's face the way you can only read someone's face after 30 years. She sat down across from me. She put both hands flat on the table. She looked at the wall for a moment. I said, "What was that?" She told me. I sat with it for a second. I've learned not to react too fast because my first reactions tend to run hot. Then I said, "She wants you to cater their Christmas party." Joanna looked at me. "It's for family, Joanna. 22 people, 12 dishes. She wants you to bring your own equipment." She said it would be meaningful. I asked her how many of those 22 people were her family, her blood. She thought about it. Her 2 sisters and their husbands. That's 4 out of 22. The rest were Sky's coworkers, Sky's cousin, Brendan's college friends, people Joanna had met once or not at all. I asked Joanna what Sky was contributing to this meaningful Christmas. The venue, apparently, and the table settings. I didn't say what I was thinking. I just said, "You don't have to do this." Joanna said, "I know," and she went quiet in that way she does now. Here is the part I want to be honest about, because I think a lot of you have been in this exact place. Joanna had never set a hard boundary with Sky. Not once. Every time Sky had been thoughtless, the unanswered texts, the dinners she didn't help clean up, the birthday last year when Sky sent a gift card 2 weeks late with no card, Joanna had let it go. She'd told herself it wasn't worth making things difficult, that Brendan was happy, that she didn't want to be the kind of mother-in-law who caused problems. What she didn't realize, what I don't think either of us fully understood, is that every time she let something go without saying a word, Sky took note. Not in a calculating way, maybe, but in the way people do when they've never been told no. When silence reads as agreement, when kindness reads as availability. Joanna had spent 3 years teaching Sky that she was available for whatever was asked of her, and Sky had learned the lesson well. I gave Joanna a few days. I didn't push, but I watched her in the kitchen in the evenings, standing at the counter with a mug of tea, not really drinking it. I knew she was turning it over. On the Saturday after that phone call, she came and sat down next to me on the couch. She turned the TV off. She said, "I don't want to do it." I said, "Okay." She said, "I've been doing things I don't want to do for years because I didn't want to cause trouble, and I'm tired." I said, "I know." She said, "I think we should go away for Christmas." I looked at her. Really looked at her. Because in 30 years, Joanna had never, not once, put herself first at the holidays. She'd always been the one holding everything together for everyone else. And something in her voice told me this wasn't just about the dinner. It was about something bigger. A decision she was making about how much of herself she was willing to keep giving away. I said, "Where do you want to go?" She said, "Somewhere warm." I said, "Done." I looked up flights that same night. There's a resort outside of Tucson, Arizona that we'd talked about for years and never gotten around to. It's the kind of place where you sit on a patio and watch the sun go down over the desert, and nobody asks you for anything. I found 2 spots, December 23rd through the 28th. I didn't hesitate. I booked us in. We didn't tell Brendan right away. I know some people might disagree with that, and I get it, but hear me out. We wanted to be sure, without any pressure, without Brendan calling back and Sky talking him into pleading our case, without the whole thing becoming a negotiation. We made our decision. Then we'd share it. We had about 3 weeks between the booking and Christmas. During that time, Brendan called twice. Both times the conversation circled back to the holidays. Once he asked if Joanna had thought more about Sky's request. Joanna said she was still thinking, which was true. She'd thought about it plenty, and arrived at her answer, she just hadn't delivered it yet. The second call, Brendan mentioned that Sky was starting to plan the seating chart, and wanted to know if Joanna needed help sourcing the standing rib roast, because the good butcher near their house had a limited order window. Joanna told him she'd get back to him. The week before we left, Joanna wrote a letter, an actual letter by hand, because that's who she is. She wrote it at the kitchen table over 2 evenings. I read it when she was done. It was not a mean letter. It was not a dramatic letter. It was a clear one. She told Brendan that she loved him, that she wanted him to be happy, that she had always tried to be supportive of his family and his life, and that she had realized, over the past few weeks, that she needed to start being honest instead of just agreeable. She said she wouldn't be cooking Christmas dinner, that what had been asked of her, 12 dishes, from scratch, for 22 people, arriving early with her own ingredients and equipment, was not something she was willing to take on. Not because she didn't love him, but because it was too much, and she hadn't been asked so much as assigned. She told him she hoped he'd understand, that she hoped Sky would understand too, that she genuinely wanted them to have a wonderful Christmas. Then she told him that she and I were going to be in Arizona from the 23rd, and she hoped they could get together in the new year. She signed it Love, Mom. She sealed it, addressed it, and we drove to their house on a Sunday afternoon while they were at Sky's mother's place. Brendan had mentioned it on one of those calls. We had a spare key for emergencies. We went in through the kitchen door, left the letter on the counter where Brendan would see it when he came in, and left. I want to be honest, driving away from that house, I felt a knot in my stomach. Not regret, exactly, but awareness of what was coming. You don't get to set a boundary like that, the first real one, after years of none, without some noise. I knew there would be noise. We got home. Joanna made soup. We watched a movie. She slept better that night than she had in 3 weeks, I noticed that. The call from Brendan came Monday evening. I answered. He started calm. He said he'd read the letter and he wanted to talk. I told him that was fine, that I'd hand him to his mother. He said he wanted to talk to me first. He asked me if I knew about the letter before Joanna sent it. I told him I did, that we'd decided together. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Dad, she has 22 people coming. She's been planning this for months. I said, I know. That's Sky's event. Your mother didn't plan it and wasn't asked. She was assigned to it. He said, nobody was trying to assign her anything. Sky just thought. I said, Brendan. Just his name. Your wife sent your mother a list of 12 dishes to cook from scratch for 22 people, most of whom your mother has never met, and told her to bring her own stand mixer. What would you call that? Silence. I didn't fill it. I've learned that silence, after a real question, is worth something. Let it sit. He said, I didn't know it was that detailed. And there it was. I believed him. I don't think Brendan had read the actual request. I think Sky had mentioned asking your mom about dinner, and he'd nodded and let it happen. Which was its own problem, but a different one. I said, your mother has been giving this family everything she has for years. She has never once asked for anything in return. She didn't say no to Sky out of spite. She said no because she was tired and she needed to. More silence. He said, can't she just do a few things? A few dishes? I said, she's in Arizona. He didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then he said, you're serious? I said, we leave the 23rd. We'd love to see you and Sky in January. He was hurt. I could hear it, and that part was hard. I want to be honest about that. There was nothing fun about hearing my son try to process that his parents weren't going to be there. That's not a feeling I wanted for him. But I also thought about Joanna at the kitchen table, not drinking her tea, carrying something she'd been carrying for years. And I thought, someone has to put her first. If not me, who? Brendan said he'd have to talk to Sky. I said that sounded like a good idea. He hung up. Joanna was in the next room. She came in and sat down next to me on the couch. She didn't ask what was said. She'd heard enough of my side to know. She leaned her head on my shoulder for a minute. We didn't talk about it much. We started packing that week. The drive to the airport on the 23rd was quiet in the best possible way. We had coffee from the travel mugs Joanna always fills before a trip. The sun was just coming up. There was frost on the windshield that I'd scraped off in the dark, and the car was warm, and my wife had her shoes off and her feet up on the dash the way she does on long drives. I thought, this is what I wanted to give her, just this. A morning where nobody needs anything from her. We landed in Tucson late morning. The air was different there, dry and clear and warm, even in December. The desert in winter is something I hadn't expected. The resort was low and quiet, with terracotta walls and big views, and a fire pit they lit every evening at sunset. We had a patio with 2 chairs and a little table, and we sat out there that first night with glasses of wine and watched the sky go dark and orange, and then purple and then full of stars. Joanna said, I should have done this years ago. I said, yeah. She said, not a trip this. She meant the no, the line. The choosing herself, I said, I know. She put her hand over mine on the armrest. We sat there for a long time without saying anything. Christmas Eve, we drove into Tucson and walked around downtown. There was a market, local vendors, handmade things, tamales from a stand that I'm still thinking about. We found a little restaurant that had a Christmas Eve prefix. Just the 2 of us, a corner table, candles, a bottle of wine we'd normally consider too expensive, and split the difference on anyway. Joanna had sea bass. I had duck. We both had the chocolate thing for dessert. We talked the way you do when there's nothing pressing, when nobody needs you anywhere. She told me stories from her years as a school nurse that I'd never heard, funny ones, sweet ones. I told her about a job I'd had at 22 that I'm still embarrassed about. We laughed until the couple at the next table looked over. Christmas morning, we opened the gifts we'd packed. Just small things, socks and books and the fancy tea she'd wanted. We had breakfast on the patio. There was a roadrunner that wandered through the courtyard and stopped and looked at us like we were the strangest thing he'd seen all week. I had my phone on silent. Around noon on Christmas Day, I turned the sound back on. I had a text from Brendan. Sent at 11:48 a.m. He'd written, "Merry Christmas. I hope it's good out there. I've been doing some thinking. I'm sorry it took me this long." That was all, no drama, no list of grievances, just that. I showed it to Joanna. She read it twice. She pressed her lips together in that way she does when she's trying not to cry. She typed back, "Merry Christmas, sweetheart. We're good. We'll talk soon." She put the phone down on the table face down. She picked up her coffee. She looked out at the desert. What I didn't know until we got home, Brendan told us later, in January, when the four of us finally sat down together, was what had happened on their end on Christmas Day. Apparently, Sky had scrambled. She'd called a catering company on the 20th, but the good ones were already booked. She ended up with a service that did a decent job, but not what she'd envisioned. The rib roast came pre-sliced in a tray, and the rolls were clearly reheated. Two of her coworkers had brought dishes to help fill the gap. Brendan had made the mashed potatoes himself, following a YouTube video, and he said they turned out fine. The dinner happened. Nobody went hungry, but Sky's cousin had asked, at the table, where Brendan's parents were, and when Sky said we were in Arizona, there'd been a moment of quiet that apparently said more than anyone intended. Brendan told us this plainly, like he was reporting facts. He wasn't trying to make Sky look bad. She was sitting right there across from us at the restaurant. She was quiet through most of that lunch, but before we left, she said something to Joanna in the parking lot while Brendan and I were getting the car. I didn't hear what was said. Joanna told me afterward. Sky had said, "I didn't realize how much I was asking. I don't think I would have if you'd just kept saying yes." It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was an honest thing to say. And Joanna, who is Joanna, had put her hand on Sky's arm and said, "That's why I stopped." In the restaurant, I'd watched Joanna across the table, talking with Brendan about his work, asking Sky about her sister who'd just had a baby, laughing at something I missed while I was looking at the menu. She was relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. Not performing, not managing, just herself. We still don't know exactly what the next holidays will look like. Brendan's mentioned getting together in a way that sounds more equal. Everyone contributing, nobody carrying it alone. Sky's been a little warmer since January. Not a transformation, but something has shifted. I think about what it costs to keep giving when you've never been asked, just expected. I think about how long my wife carried that and how it never occurred to her to put it down until she was so tired she had no choice. Here's what I want to say to the people listening, and I think you know who you are. The ones who are always the ones who show up, who fill the silence, who cook the meal, pack the car, remember the thing, send the card. Who have been told, by silence or by expectation, that their time and their energy don't have limits. It took my wife 61 years to sit down across from me, put her hands flat on the table, and say she was tired. I should have asked her sooner. And if there's someone in your life like her, someone who does and does and does and never says a word, maybe the best thing you can do is ask before they have to. We went back to that resort in April for our anniversary. We'll probably go again next year. Some things you should have started earlier, but the second best time is now.